Welcome to 28.5, where we explore a unique and authentic perspective on the women's game, break down upcoming matchups, and discuss the latest news and trends in women's basketball. We are your hosts. I'm Sydney Story, and I played at the University of Tennessee under Pat Summitt.
And I'm Becca Goodman, and I played at the University of Notre Dame under Muffet McGraw. And we're thrilled to have you join us today. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy what you hear, be sure to tune in each week and support and share the love. Now let's get started with today's episode.
Welcome, everyone, to our first Team Huddle episode. We are mixing it up a bit and adding in a new type of episode that we want to drop every once in a while. Just a quick Q&A between Becca and myself and all of you. So Team Huddle, standing for a way for us to huddle together as a full team and really engage with you all. We've been asking in most episodes for you all to hit us up on our socials, ask any type of questions you have for us, and we want to give some of those answers on some great questions we've had come through. So are you ready to jump in, Becca? Are you ready to do this first episode of our Team Huddle?
Yeah, I love a good team huddle. I think that's where a lot of real things get asked, answered, and brought to light. So absolutely love the fact that we have people on our social medias reaching out to us, asking about stuff that were live in-game scenarios that happened and kind of wanted to get our take on it. So we're going to make it really relevant to when and how we do these team huddles. And we just appreciate all of our followers and people that tune in, interact with us. And so we wanted to absolutely make sure we answered some of these. So Sid, you want to roll with that first one?
Yeah, so the first question we have that we want to hit is from Jordan from Facebook. And he had asked us thoughts on officiating in the UConn versus Notre Dame game. So this is the game that recently just happened this past Thursday. And it got a lot of hype afterwards. And I thought it was a really good question because we talk about officiating a little bit, but it's a big part of the game. Can't control officials. Officials are trying to call the game the best they can. And in this case, the UConn fans thought that it was pretty uneven. The game was in South Bend. It was a tight game, top 10 matchup, UConn coming in undefeated. Notre Dame, again, playing on their home court with that home crowd. And it's easy to try to look for excuses when you lose games, right? And sometimes you feel like the game was maybe called unfair or uneven. And I think that's the case here. What were your takes on it, Becca, from last Thursday's game?
Yeah. So being a player who was in this type of game and in this type of environment, whether it was at UConn or at Notre Dame, you're always going to have something to say about officiating. I mean, you are, right? Like that's part of the game. It's something slightly out of your control with interpretation, right? So really getting a feel for the referees early on and adjusting your play is always huge. I think when you look at the fouls, it's UConn was 3 of 5. Notre Dame was 11 of 14. But the actual total game fouls, UConn had 15 and Notre Dame have 12. So a difference of 3. And I know when you look at that, it's very much like, oh, well, the free throws were uneven, but the foul count might have been. So again, that's possession based. That's how they're calling the game. UConn was they were driving, putting their head down, trying to get to the rack. So was Notre Dame's defense perfect? Probably not. But I don't think it makes a difference in the outcome of a game when it's an 11-point game and Notre Dame was draining threes, right? Like that, I think that tells more of the tale. That's something you can control, where officiating is more or less out of your hands. I don't feel like one way or the other it was, oh, UConn got the short end of the stick or Notre Dame was fouling everywhere. I think it, like I said, having history with this game, everybody does a little bit of something at some point in time. So I think it's playing through it, adjusting to it, and trying to still achieve success in the moment. What do you think, Sid?
Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective. Totally agree with all of that. One of the first things that I look at, and in particular in this game, in the big games, is who's officiating the games.
Yep.
It tells you that the officiating crews and schedulers are taking games seriously like this. And you have Dee Kantner and Eric Bruton, two of the top officials in the game. They were around officiating the Final Fours back when we played. And those are two of the biggest vets in the game who are known to be fair and really good officials.
Yep.
So to me, you know that they're not going to be partial to one team over the other, and they're going to try to call that game as fair as possible. I did really think they called it fair. I mean, you called it out, right? Personal fouls, 15 for UConn, 12 for Notre Dame. Pretty close there. It's not going to be exact, right? And there was a time in the game, though, I will say, where there was a possession when you can tell Paige Beckers thought she was fouled.
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Yep. And she's turning to the officials, running down the court. Gino's going nuts. They come back down on the offensive end, and Dee Cantner calls a makeup call.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
That was huge to me, where you see the experience of Dee Cantner knowing that they missed one, and they gave him one on the next possession, right? So
agree.
That to me was telling. I think what also caused a lot of this hype was the commentators mentioned it a couple times. Wow, UConn's only been to the free throw line once so far this game. Rebecca Lobo had mentioned it one time, right? So then fans are listening to that and they're going, oh, that doesn't seem right. Like they're just really not giving UConn the foul calls that they should be getting. And I thought that maybe created some of the hype, especially for some of those fans that are going to be partial to their team and maybe don't understand the game a ton. I mean, that happens, right? And they want to find some of those excuses of where it was unfair and no, actually we're the better team and we should have won that game and this is what happened to us. But to be honest, like I thought it was overall called pretty fair. That's kind of my perspective on it.
Yep. What a great highlight you did there of, Dee Cantner with it within the game, not stopping, acknowledging it, but kind of giving her a makeup call in the next play down. Like that is right. Nobody's perfect, especially officials. I know we see this probably even at the WNBA level with the whole Caitlin Clark saga that's going on. But I agree with you completely that was a great way for a veteran official to kind of get a makeup call, keep them in check, make sure temperatures don't get too crazy, cheap shots don't get called, things like that. So it was a way for her to control the game without taking over the game from an official standpoint. Do you want to jump into our next one? I think we touched on question 1 pretty good.
We did. We hit it there. Let's jump to another one. This one comes from Allie from Instagram. And she asks, how do student athletes juggle the holidays while school is out? Where do they stay? What is the schedule like? So I'm curious, Becca, if you want to answer this one first. We probably had similar yet different experiences playing at two different schools. So I'm curious what your experience was like at Notre Dame.
And isn't it interesting that we both played D1, and you kind of assume it's the same, but it might not be. And when you hear stories or whatever we're about to answer, it's kind of like, oh man, I didn't know you did that. It's just interesting. So Notre Dame, obviously the trimester ends around December, right? People go home, you're there. And I'm fortunate enough to live close to home. So I was able to, still see family. But what Notre Dame did was they put us up in a hotel. So it's a lot of times where the dorms get cleaned, or if there's any work that's needing to be done, they do it while all the students are out. And we can't stay on campus because the school essentially shuts down, right? So there's no dining halls that are open, right? So we would just be around. So they put us all in. Oh man, Sid, you would know this. I should know this. It's my favorite. The Varsity Club. The theme of it is all Notre Dame based. So it's all different sports. It's memorabilia galore. It was just an absolute blast. And I remember that being one of my favorite times, honestly. So we were able to stay there for, a couple weeks. You pretty much move in, you share a room, but it's a suite type thing. So you each have your own wing. And it was just, you got per diem because that's what they do for student athletes over Christmas break. So a certain amount of money per day for meals and stuff like that. So, I remember that being the absolute best time. It was just a good way for your team to bond. You'd go to the hot tub, talk about practice. You still have practice. You still have workouts. You still have lifts, film, and travel. But instead of going home and having homework and you're in a dorm, you're off campus and it's a nice break and you're all together. It's like, so at Notre Dame, we didn't have athlete dorms. So, and while you were on scholarship, that you had to stay the first 3 years on campus. So we couldn't move off officially, that the school would pay for on scholarship until your senior year. So this was like a nice little treat for us throughout the year when it was like, oh, we got to go to a hotel and, live a little, I guess you'd say. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. It was like, well, what are we going to do today? And it was just a good bonding time as well. To this day, I still randomly, when we're in South Bend or I'm there with my mom, I'm like, oh, the varsity club. Just memories, just a good time. What about you? What did Tennessee do?
Yeah, that's awesome. We did not get put up in in a
What?
nice hotel. That sounds amazing. At Tennessee, we could move off campus after our freshman year. And that started with my class at Tennessee. So there were four of us in my class. And traditionally you had to stay another year through your sophomore year in the dorms. But for us, after my freshman year, we were able to move off campus. And it's like you said, campus does pretty much shut down. It's a ghost town. No dining hall, no kids walking around, no class, but you're there for practice. You're there to still lift weights and work out and go to the training room for treatment. All of that stuff is still there. And for me, I loved it. Like campus was dead. We felt like we owned campus, right? Like we're the only ones really around is just the athletes. And then I remember we would have cookie decorating parties and different things like that within our apartment my sophomore year, junior year, and senior year. We would do festive things like that that just made it fun.
Mhm.
And we still stayed in our apartment throughout the Christmas break. We got per diem, which was awesome. Like I just remember getting handed a big envelope full of cash, and at that point, it's like $1,000 or something. You're
Yeah.
thinking like you're rich.
Yeah.
Like this is like
Yep.
a lot of money back then because we were poor student athletes. But
We weren't getting NIL deals.
yeah, no. And that was always fun. And then for a lot of the Christmas break, at least for a week of it, we would go on a big trip. So they would schedule games where we'd be out of town.
Mhm.
So I had mentioned this before, like my freshman year, we went out and played at Stanford. My sophomore year, we New York City for a week. We were in Chicago for a week. Actually, when we played you guys, that was part of the
Mhm.
big trip for us that we had with that week when we were away. And so I thought that was always a good way to break up the holidays is scheduling some big road away games where you're regionally in an area for that week and you can kind of get away and off campus because then at some point it becomes a little bit mundane and
Yeah.
boring because nobody's around, right? So
Yep.
you have that week or so where you can get off campus and see other people, right? And
Yeah.
then what's tough about the holidays is you don't get a ton of time at home. I know you live close to home, so maybe a little bit easier for you to get home. But for us, we had 3.5 to 4 days by the time you traveled there and back that we got
Mhm.
to go back for Christmas time. And so when you think about that, most college students are home for a long time.
Weeks, month. Yeah.
For
Yep.
Christmas break, we got 4 days at
Yeah.
best. So you really tried to get home, see all your family and friends, spend a little bit of time away, and then you went right back to it. So
Mhm.
that was just part of it, right? And I look back, and for me, it was those 4 days that I got home around Christmas, and then we had roughly 5 to 6 weeks in the May timeframe, late April through like early June, where we got to come home. And then we did, for the most part, a lot of us did both semesters of summer school.
Mhm.
So you had those 4 days at Christmas, 6 weeks in the spring, and then you were on campus. You were
Yeah.
going to class pretty much year round at that point. So that just becomes your life. And the holidays were a way where you could just get that little bit of break to go home and kind of refresh heading into conference play, which I thought was always good timing with that also. Yeah, I used to like it though. I used to enjoy it. I always thought it was kind of a fun break in the action. I remember one time we stayed in the locker room and just had like a movie night and just
Oh,
hung
that's
out.
cool.
Yeah,
You
just a
make it.
handful
You
of us.
gotta make it what it is. No, that sounds definitely cool.
Yeah, some good memories for sure with your teammates when you don't have to worry about school.
Yeah, it definitely helped me being close to home, and a lot of people who, another girl that played on our AAU team, Melissa Leckleitner, she was also close to home. So if people couldn't get out or flights just didn't work out or they were crazy expensive, we would just kind of divide, split up, and then anybody who is left on campus would come home with us for the day, the night, a couple days, whatever. So it was good they got to get a break from campus and also kind of come home. So not to their home, but we invited them as if they were.
Yeah, right.
That's
They're
what
family
teammates
at that
do.
point.
Yeah,
It's your family.
honestly. All right. So let's jump to our third question. Sid, if you were to give one piece of advice to an incoming freshman on their basketball journey, what would it be? And this question comes from one of our friends, Katie. So we definitely wanted to get this in. It seems like, freshmen are stepping up big time college-wise. So if you could give a piece of advice, what would it be?
Shout out to Step or Ride or
Shout
Die.
out, Steppy.
Good question here. One piece of advice to an incoming freshman. It feels like a lot when you're in it, especially your freshman year. It's a whirlwind because it's all new to you. We've mentioned the intensity of scouting for the first time in film. The intensity of the weight room is insane. The intensity of practices, everything is just leveled up 10x, it seems like, right? And so at some point, you kind of get into a little bit of a survival mode where you're just trying to get through the day, get through the next day. And then eventually, by your sophomore year, junior year, senior year, it becomes more of the routine and you know what to expect and you can start thriving a little bit more. But that freshman year, you are straight up in survival mode and you forget to kind of step back and put in perspective where you're at, how you got there, and what you need to continue to do to get better. And to me, you just kind of have to see big picture and remember what you're trying to do. Set goals for yourself individually. You're going to set a ton of team goals, right? You're going to know exactly what those are. Your coaches are going to make that crystal clear for you, especially if you're playing at one of these top tier programs. But individually, what are you trying to do? What type of teammate are you trying to be? What type of basketball player are you trying to be? What degree do you want? All those things, really take the time to soak all of that in, everything you're learning, but then also to set goals for yourself and remember that at the end of the day, you got to put your shoes on. You've got to show up every day, day in and day out. And how are you going to show up? And to me, setting those goals and then in your mind, putting those building blocks together of how you're going to get there and staying on track to that is just huge. But it is super overwhelming as a freshman. There's nothing really that can prepare you for it until you're there.
No, even though they say summer school, right? Because you're doing the workout schedule plus some classes, nothing prepares you for the travel, the intensity, the grind, right? So if I were to answer that, I would just say give yourself grace. Understand it's a learning experience. Every day is a day to get better. And even when you're a senior, you're still going to learn things. You're never going to be on top of everything. And as I mentioned, I think in one of our earlier episodes about how, you think you're the top dog in high school, you're getting recruited. There's always a bottom of a totem pole, and there's always going to be work to get to the top. And it's just your own pace, your own way, as long as you're open to it and understand there's going to be challenges and it's going to be hard and you can get through hard, you're going to be able to succeed. So I would just say, give yourself grace. It's a journey and keep chugging.
Yeah, I think that's great. And nowadays, what's so different is the business side of it, right? We talk about this a ton. Yeah. My advice on that side would be, depending on what school you're at, is find somebody in the business school, find somebody in film school, whatever school you're at, who is good at social media, who can maybe manage your account for you, put up great content. Find an agent out there. If you're playing at one of these top tier programs, find a way to monetize the situation you're in as a freshman through those 4 years, because if you can capitalize on a ton of that, and maybe you don't go play basketball at the next level, but you're able to really monetize on those 4 years, go for it. That's the new thing here that we didn't have, and is such an opportunity for players nowadays.
Yeah. And if you're not probably one of those top tier players that's, having a crazy amount of NIL deals, I would just also add, tap into that alumni network early and often. I wish that was something I would have used and leaned in on early on, just because you get an idea of people where they are after life after basketball. Not everybody, it's 1% that makes it to D1 college, and then it's an even smaller percentage rate that makes it pro. And there is life after basketball for everybody. No matter if you play overseas, you play in the WNBA, at some point it stops. And I think tapping into that alumni network is just super valuable to see where people have come from, where they're at now, and meet and make those connections. That was something I did after I call it my first real adult job after basketball when I grew up. I started tapping into those Chicago networks, Michigan, and it was just, I wish I just would have done it sooner. It's a huge asset. They love Notre Dame, obviously, or your college, right? They love it. They want to help in any way, whether it's an opportunity or just a conversation and next step on where to go. So if you're not doing that, do it now. It's super helpful, and there you meet some great people. All right, Sid, let's jump into our last question of our team huddle. If you had to pick the final 4 teams right now, who is making it? And this is a question we wanted to ourselves get into this episode and ask one another just to see where we're at. We don't know each other's. We wrote them down. So Sid, why don't you go first?
I think it's a really good benchmark point in the season right now because a lot of conference games have already begun or are about to begin coming up here. So we talk about like the different seasons within the season, and conference play is certainly its own season. So we've kind of finished that beginning of the season mode where there's a lot of good non-conference matchups, and we've seen a lot of good matchups. We've definitely talked through a ton of those so far in the first 11 episodes. But for me, when I look at this and I look at the body of work that's already been done and the body of work that teams need to do to prepare themselves to continue to win by one every game in the NCAA tournament, the number one team that I wrote down on the paper was South Carolina. And I really think it's because some of those players have been there. You've got Dawn Staley, who absolutely knows what it takes at this point. And it's such the expectation in that program right now that you're making the Final Four. So that already sets a high bar. And if they fall a little bit short, well, that's a total loss and a wasted season. And that's the mentality, I think, that Dawn brings, that those players, I think, are also bringing, the fans certainly bring. That's the expectation there. So South Carolina, I put in there. They're also going to learn and grow more as playing in the SEC. The SEC is really tough this year now that Texas and Oklahoma are also in there. You've got LSU in there. You've got Tennessee that's now in the top 25 that brings a different style that you learn from and you prepare for. Ole Miss has been playing pretty well. So the SEC is going to bring it. And I'm missing teams. Kentucky, right? We talk about Georgia Amore a ton and Kenny Brooks and what he's bringing. So I think that the SEC is going to prepare South Carolina even more. The other one I wrote down was UConn, and purely because of Gino and Paige. It's Paige's senior year, and I think it's going to be that same expectation. Like, I need to be in the Final Four. We need to be in the Final Four. Let's figure this out. They got to stay healthy. They're not super deep right now. I think Sarah Strong needs to continue to mature throughout this season, which I'm sure she will. She brings solid minutes. Can Paige put that team on her back, get them to the Final Four? I think so. So I've got UConn on there. I've got Notre Dame. I think that they are going to win the ACC this year. They're favored to win it. They just bring something different with Hannah Hidalgo and Olivia Miles. Maddie Westbelt should be back, starting conference play here sometime, beginning of the year, whenever that ends up being. And I think that they are hungry for the most part. I think they're going to hopefully mature a little bit more where you're not having some of those upset losses. They're taking care of business day in and day out. If Notre Dame does that, I think they're in the Final Four. And then, I almost said it, but I kind of got to set the tone. My fourth pick is kind of my wild card pick.
Okay.
And I thought we saw some of that last year. I didn't think NC State was going to make the Final Four, and they did. Right? Yep. We're starting to see some of these teams that like kind of sprinkle in. We don't have a ton of Cinderella stories typically on the women's side. And this one's not necessarily a Cinderella story because this coach has been there before, but I think it would be a shock to a lot of people. So I'm trying to call like a fun one, right? Not just like I picked 1 through 4 and that was easy. I'm going with my fourth team and my wild card team, Maryland.
What?
Yeah.
I would never have guessed that. Okay.
See, you
explain yourself. No.
You thought I was going to put UCLA in there, the number one team right now.
I thought you were going to pick a couple other ones. I did not see that one coming. Go on.
My reasoning here. So we talked about the SEC being strong. I think the Big Ten is like insane this year. Obviously, with Iowa last year and what Caitlin Clark and Kate Martin and that whole squad they brought a ton of strength to the Big Ten. So did IU. But if you look at it now, they've got UCLA, USC. You've got Michigan State, who's off to the best program start in the history of the Spartan women basketball program. You look at the Big Ten right now, and it is it is pretty stacked. And I think that that's going to make Maryland even better throughout the season. And what's going to lead them and guide them there is Brenda Fries. I think she's the X factor there. She's
experience.
She's so experienced, right? She's been in the Final Four 3 different times with, if you look back, 3 completely different teams. And I think that they've got some players this year that are capable of putting up points. I think they're pretty deep this year. That's what some of these teams are missing, is some of the depth. And I think Maryland's got some of that depth. Beginning of the year, their offense was a little bit questionable. But then I watched them play against Duke, and I'm like, hey, if they're playing like this and they can figure out how to do this consistently throughout the season, I think Maryland could shock some people. They're ranked 7th right now. Obviously, the new rankings are going to come out on Monday when this drops, but that's pretty good, right? They're in the top 10. We'll see. I might be, in 2 or 3 weeks looking at myself like, well, they are not going to be in the Final Four, right? They lost to so-and-so.
You have to give it something. You have to give something.
And that's my wild card. And I really respect what Brenda Fries brings. And I know Maryland's capable because she knows what it takes. And I think that would be a fun one. Okay.
Yeah.
What are yours?
Well, we're on the same team there with the South Carolina, the experience, Dawn Staley, expectations are through the roof. So same there. Notre Dame, obviously, they've had 3 of the toughest games versus top 5 opponents and got W's. So I think when they're able to focus it in and channel it, they can make a deep run there. And I'm hoping it's more than just a Final Four. But I go back and forth between, and I'm going to commit. So I know you're going to make me commit. I have 3 teams for the last 2 spots. So I'm going to commit. Here I go. I'll rock with UConn for the, again, experience, the standards, Page's last year. Listening to Gino's press conference after the Notre Dame game, and he just mentioned how other people need to step up. He mentioned they didn't really have a bench. So I think that's going to be a focus for them for more point production as opposed to just Sarah and Paige, even though I think when those 2 get rolling, they can do it. But when they get locked up or have an off night, other people absolutely have to step up. So I'm going to go with UConn for my 3rd. So I think we're 1, 2, 3 there. My 4th pick, I'm deciding between these 2, but my gut is telling me USC. I just think Juju knows this year's a big year. It's Kiki's last year. That is a nice post guard combo. And I think the USC coach realizes we need to kind of build around her and have her build within the game and let the game come to her, right? Obviously, everybody's focusing on her. It's pressure. It's probably the hardest point she's ever had to score during the season now more than ever. But I think last year they had a couple guards that were able to sprinkle in and hit consistent shots, knock down threes. And I think this Christmas break specifically, they're going to find and build those other 2-3 guards to come in and be consistent for them.
I like it.
Those are my 4. I almost said Texas, dude.
Right?
I almost said Texas.
Yeah. So honestly, I have a list of 8 teams. So I did something kind of similar. Like it's hard to slot just 4 in for me right now. But I mean, you have to make the choice, right?
Yeah.
South Carolina, UConn, Notre Dame, Maryland, I put in there. But I have in my just fall short list, USC, UCLA, LSU, and Texas. Yeah. I see it. I think what's huge here is what seed you get. Mm-hmm. All these games are they mattered before. They're going to really matter now.
Yep.
Because you don't want to get that 2 or 3 seed and have to turn around and within your bracket play some of these top 1 tier programs. Like if you can get that number 1 seed and start at the top of the bracket there, it really helps you a ton. And you and I know that, having played in Final Four, and it's just huge for these teams. So what I liked about my picks, not that they're going to be wrong for sure, because that's basketball and there's upsets, but it was from 4 different conferences, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fun, right? Yeah. So the SEC, Big East, ACC, and the Big Ten. I would love for something like that to happen because I just think it shows some of the parity across the conferences, and it's good for our sport overall. So
yeah, absolutely.
We'll see. We'll have to do this again coming up here after conference. And that's a wrap for our first team huddle. Thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you on Friday with our normal drop.
Awesome. Thanks, Sid. And thanks to Jordan, Allie, and Katie for being part of our huddle today. Appreciate you guys. See you, Sid.
See you, Beck.
That's the 28.5 final buzzer for today's episode. Don't forget to hit follow on your preferred podcast platforms to catch every play-by-play. New episodes drop each week throughout the season.
If you've enjoyed our courtside chat, drop us a review or follow us on our social media accounts. And remember, from females who have played the game, the size of the ball matters.